Today, I'm going to hand over now to Sue Lees to introduce Jane Stabb. I'm absolutely delighted to have her today. I'll hand over to our stop share and hand over to you, Sue, so you can introduce Jane.
Well, thank you, Jane, for being here today, especially when you've got sick children. We never forget those memories. So Jane is CEO for Climate for Change. So Jane has worked in the climate space for at least the past decade, and she believes very much in leveraging the power of the ordinary person. So Climate for Change is basically about developing a conversation program about climate change that people can have in their homes, with friends, in their workplaces. So Climate for Change believes that social change happens through engaging with people we trust, such as friends and family, work colleagues, and then that leads to people being more likely to take action. So I think that's a really important concept that sometimes we tend to forget. As I was researching on Jane and Climate for Change, I actually thought it's actually good for us, even though we're in the climate space and we're very committed to it, for us to understand what other people are going through when they come to that climate space. And so having these conversations can actually help us do it and do it in the best way possible, because sometimes, unfortunately, people who have taken on the climate mantra tend to sometimes preach rather than actually engage in conversation, and we need to be really careful that we don't do that type of thing. So basically, Jane's going to tell us about their program, how it runs, why it runs, how it's worked. They've done a lot of research on it, which is really great to see that they've got the research to back it up. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to learn and maybe to engage formally with Climate for Change, also to learn how we can have more informal conversations if we want to. So thank you, Jane.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I loved both of your introductions. I am a proud female leader in a sector where there are a lot of staff and volunteer women and still very few female leaders. And I am one of two co-CEOs in my organisation. I put my hand up for the role. I've been in the role now for 18 months, and my co-worker, Lena Herrera-Pekarski, is a mother as well. She's got a 10-month-old baby now, would you believe it, and is a co-CEO. She's an absolute inspiration. And we could not have done this role. We both considered putting our hands up for the role full-time solo, but decided against it because, part of the reason I care so passionately about climate action and ensuring a safe future is because I love my family and I care so desperately about ensuring that we have a safe future for them. And it also means that I want to hang out with them. I've got 2 little kids and I don't want to spend a fair chunk of my life working. And so I'm absolutely passionate about the model of co-leadership and female leadership. And I am constantly reminded that I stand on the shoulders of giants and women who've been in leadership before me. And I'm always appreciative of groups like this, of incredible women. And so I just want to say I feel really privileged to talk to you today. I think you said, Sue, that I had 20 minutes. Feel free, I'll just talk, and feel free to interrupt me and give me the wrap up if you need to get on with your other business. I won't be offended if you have to kick me off. But I might tell you a little bit about myself to start with and how I came to this role, before sharing a bit about the organisation. Like you said in your introduction, Sue, we support people to have effective conversations about climate change. We've got a formal structure that we engage with that I'd love for you to consider for your organisation, and I can also share some tips and tricks at the end if that's useful for you as well. But by way of introduction, like you said, my name's Jane Stabb. I am one of the co-CEOs of Climate for Change. I'm today calling in from Wurundjeri Woiwurrung country down here in Melbourne. I grew up in a beautiful town about an hour north of here. It's called Macedon, right on the meeting point of Wurundjeri Woiwurrung, Taungurung and Dja Dja Wurrung countries. And it's right at the southern tip of the Great Dividing Range, a beautiful wombat state forest for those who know the area, a beautiful stringy bark woodland. You know, there's wombats, there's koalas, there's kangaroos. It's so beautiful. We've still got a family place out there. And it's in a bushfire zone. It was one of those towns that got burnt out in the 1983 Ash Wednesday fires. And as a kid, bushfires came close to our place every year. I was one of those kids that grew up with a bag packed, waiting by the back door all summer, ready to go at a moment's notice. I remember our bushfire plan as kids was that mum and us would leave and my dad would stay to defend the house. And I grew up just having nightmares about saying goodbye to my dad. And for me, as I grew to understand what the impacts of climate change are going to be and are now increasingly, that's what it feels like for me. I recently had a really profound experience where when I read the book Firestorm, I'm not sure if any of you have come across it, by former commissioner of what do they call it in New South Wales? Fire and Rescue New South Wales. Greg Mullins is his name, and he recently founded Emergency Leaders for Climate Action. Greg has been a frontline firefighter for 5 decades more, and his book tells the story of how he's watched fire seasons change over the decades. He accounts from the early 90s, he has witnessed seasons changing quite profoundly. He describes firsthand accounts of fire tornadoes, increasingly common pyrocumulonimbus storms where the fire is so strong that it creates its own weather. And the fires that Greg describes in his book, he fought in Black Summer and Black Saturday. The fires that he describes are so different from the ones that we had when I was a kid. Scientists tell us that we've probably got, this is a really hard thing to think through, but we've probably got 2 decades of warming already locked in because of the pollution that we've already put into the atmosphere. That means that we're going to face increasingly dangerous fire seasons and storm seasons as well. Like I said, I'm calling in from Melbourne and we have just been hammered by storms the last few weeks. And we're looking down the face of another pretty wet and stormy weekend as well. This wild weather there's 2 decades of this locked in. And that's a difficult thing to come to terms with. But what happens after that is up to us. In 2040, my kids are going to be in their 20s and they're going to be thinking about having families of their own. And the decisions that we make now as a community will determine whether or not the world's safe for them. So at Climate for Change, we've got a mission to create the social climate in Australia for effective action on climate change. Climate for Change is volunteer powered, like your organisation. We're a non-profit that enables everyday Australians to have better conversations about climate change and take action. We know that it's not the climate science that we lack. It's not solutions that we lack. It's the social and political will to fix the problem. Right now, we've got new policies, we've got technologies and practices developed all around the world that, when implemented at scale, can stop and reverse global warming. But business, governments, the community, we're not implementing them at the scale and at the speed that we need. Scientists tell us that we've got a decade to really act, to cut emissions deeply, fast across the economy if we're going to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. We were absolutely over the moon at the May election this year, where we saw climate featured so prominently in the outcome of the election. We had those incredible women, independents, coming through with a really strong and passionate focus on serious climate action and bringing that to Parliament. And we've seen the effects of that already. Those MPs in formerly safe Liberal heartland seats, and also really interesting progressive swings across the board, actually, in areas where politicians will tell us that people don't care about climate change. We had progressive swings in almost every rural and regional electorate. And we had progressive swings in 7 of the 8 electorates that have coal assets, which is just extraordinary to think about. But we've got to act now. So the policies that the incoming Labor government have put forward are a lot stronger, significantly stronger than the previous government, but still nowhere near what scientists tell us we need to do. So the task now is to act with urgency and to act with ambition. We know that most Australians are concerned about climate change. It hovers somewhere around the mid 70%. 70% of people across the board, across demographics, across geographies, and across the political voting spectrum are concerned about climate change. But interestingly, very few people talk about it with their friends and family. Not many more than 20% of people have ever had a conversation with their friends and family about climate change. And so very few people are engaged or activated around the issue. And that means that governments don't feel the urgency to act with the speed and ambition that we need. And a lot of people feel alone in their concerns and not connected to communities already taking action on the issue. Research shows us that personal and social change happens when we hear and see others like us acting, and when we hear messages from messengers that we trust. So that's what our climate conversations framework has built up around. We support people to bring together their social networks, their friends, their family, their peers. It might be a parents group, it might be a sports club, it might be a group just like yours, bringing people together over a meal or online increasingly, which is a little bit less nice, but it works. Bring people together to talk about climate change. What we do is we send a trained facilitator along to have the conversation. We go through the science of climate change. We connect people emotionally on the issue. The facilitator guides people to consider how climate change might impact them and their families, their communities. And then we take attendees of the conversations through a workshop on how to take action, how to divest your super and your banking from polluting fossil fuels, how to contact your local MP, and then how to host another conversation like the one that you've just been part of. So this is happening all over the country. So far we've reached 13,000 people across the country through our really deep and often quite transformative climate conversations. We've got volunteer facilitators in every state and territory around the country, which is really exciting. We've got a DIY program where we support organisations just like yours actually to build and deliver a climate conversation to reach into your own constituencies. So far we've supported the Jewish Climate Network, we've supported the Environment Centre, Northern Territory, local councils all over Australia to build their own conversations program. And as well as supporting the program across the country, one thing that we've recently been focused on is focusing our program in key strategic communities that are really well placed to push towards cross-party support within our parliament for strong climate action. So leading into the election, we supported volunteers to really supercharge their efforts in 2 key federal electorates, North Sydney in New South Wales and Ryan up in Queensland. And now we've got lead volunteers in regional Queensland where we're supporting them to build community power to really speed up the transition to clean energy in Queensland. We saw an incredible announcement from the Queensland state government just at the end of last month where they're really ramping up ambition and speed of their transition. They have a goal now of getting out of coal-fired power in Queensland by 2035, which is just extraordinary. And there's going to have to be a huge shift in community support if that is going to be done well, fair, with decent community consultation. So that's a job that organisations like ours can do to really socialise these bold and ambitious plans when governments come up with them. So it's pretty exciting. I also am going to be a bit cheeky and take this opportunity to say that as community volunteers, you know that this work is incredibly difficult to support and fund. We run on the smell of an oily rag, and every year we host a crowdfunder, which we've got live right now. We're trying to get to $150,000 by the end of this month. And I'm just going to be cheeky and pop a link in the chat. I would just absolutely love it if you're in a position to give, if you would consider it, because it makes a huge difference for us. And I know that you understand how difficult it is to run an organisation powered by volunteers, and every little bit of support counts. So I'm going to stop there. I think I've probably gone on for long enough, but I'm definitely happy to answer any questions that you might have. Or, like I said at the start, we've got a lot of tips and tricks that we can talk you through on how to have effective climate conversations. We also have workshops that our team run for groups like yours on how to have those effective conversations about climate change. And also, of course, at any time, we've got people that you can reach out to actually host a conversation yourself if you're interested in doing that. So I'll wrap it up there, and it's just been an absolute pleasure joining you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Obviously, we'd all like to ask you questions.
Yeah.
How long are your events? So say, for example, I know you referred to it online as like a Tupperware party, sort of like a party,
yes.
party plan, which
yeah.
So how long do you need to allow for to have a decent discourse?
Great question. A tangential story I'll tell is that Katarina Gator, our founder, used to actually sell Tupperware. That's how she came up with this model. She was a greenie for ages, and she just sort of sat with this idea that this horrible thing's happening. She had little kids at the time, and she was really worried about their future. This thing was ticking over in the back of her head. And to support her kids having flexible work, she sold Tupperware, and she always felt uncomfortable about the plastic and everything. And then she thought, actually, you could use this model for good. It's such a powerful, she's using it to sell stuff. And it's such a powerful thing to bring together people who trust each other and know each other. And the Tupperware model worked so effectively, because if you're trying to sell something to your friend, you're not going to sell them something that you don't believe in. And it's the same thing with climate change. Your question was around how long we account for. Our climate conversations go for 2 hours. That's the standard framework. And we start with a video that goes for about 15 minutes about the impacts and the science. And then we go through a series of workshops. And we are actually just trialing a shorter conversation for just 1 hour. Because, to be honest, the 2 hour climate conversation, while it is very deep and very transformative, and once you've got people in that setting for such a long time, you can have a really deep and meaningful conversation, but that is a barrier for people these days. Not many people want to sit online for 2 hours. I'm sure you've experienced difficulty getting people along, especially on a bright sunny day. So we're trialing shorter conversations, and we've also got what we call a climate chat, where we have a framework that guides people in having a shorter 15-minute conversation one-on-one rather than in a group. So interested to see how those two new formats go, but our traditional setting is 2 hours. And it's usually over a meal, which is lovely. There's something very human about bringing people together to share food. Online, that's a bit more difficult, but people bring along a glass of wine. And
how you do that online,
yeah. It's not as nice, but it does actually. The flip side of it is that it allows us to reach communities that would have been a lot harder to reach in the past. So I shared that we've got a partnership with Environment Centre Northern Territory. We do not have staff up in Darwin, or we've got an emerging volunteer base, but just because we've been able to do remote organising. So that's sort of the silver lining, I suppose, to having to go online for everything.
I'm opening it to the floor. Are there any other questions from on the floor? Vicky has got her hand up. Unmute yourself, Vicky.
Lovely, thank you. Jane, I was reading on our website about the climate fresque game. Have you used that as a means by which to create those communication sessions at all?
I've never heard of it. I'm really interested to know what it is.
Well, Carol.
Well, got cards at work. Climate Fresque, they basically have 52 cards. On one side is a picture, and on the other side is the commentary about the picture. And what you do is they're about sort of A5 size, the pictures, and you grab a group of people together at the workplace where I work. We do this, and you get the cards, have a really long table, and you have the conversation about how the cards all relate to each other. And if you have a large piece of paper behind it, you get everyone to stick the cards on, and they draw lines between them to get the relationships, and then they actually artistically put designs around them, and then you can just hang it up on the wall. It's quite big, but it's they're really quite a good way of breaking the ice and just having a conversation. So it's
That's beautiful. I love that.
I'll send you the details about
Yeah,
it.
I'd love you to.
Yeah,
I'll share it with my team. They'll love it.
yeah, exactly. So you can actually print them off and what have you. Off.
Great.
I'll do that. But it's quite good fun. Quite good fun. What challenge? I mean, you've obviously been in quite a lot of conversations, Jane. What sort of challenges do you get? Have you ever been in a place where you get the wall of coal? No.
Yes. How best to answer this? So there's a few tips and tricks that you learn along the way as you have more and more of these conversations. Firstly, and I absolutely cannot underline this enough, there are some people that you are never going to convince, whose minds are never going to change. We've got a framework we use, which is called a spectrum of allies, and you can rank people based on their perceptions of climate change. And what we try to do is, say you've got number 1 is a strong ally, number 2 is a weak ally, number 3 is undecided, 4 is weak oppose, 5 is strong oppose. And if you come across a number 3 who's undecided, your goal in that conversation is to push them over into being a number 2. You're not trying to turn everyone into a strong supporter straight away, but you're trying to shift people a little step along the way towards supporting your issue. If you come across someone who strongly opposes your issue, my advice to you would be to thank them for their time and walk away from it, because there are some people you're just never going to oppose. You're just never going to convince. Deep climate skeptics. To be honest, there's less and less of these people these days. About 4% of the population are hard climate skeptics. Those people tend to have big platforms though. So it's easy to think that there's more of them out there than there actually are. And there might be some people who have received a lot of misinformation over the years. So step number 1 is to figure out who you're talking to and what they care about, and whether you have any values that align with their values. Whether or not you express those values in the same way is a really important question to answer for yourself as you're having this conversation. And the easiest way to do that is to ask questions and to listen and to find out what they care about. So someone might not like a big new wind development that's going up in their community, for example, but they might have this niggling feeling in the back of their head that something's going on. They've got a couple of kids or grandkids. A lot of people that I speak to have had grandchildren for the first time, and all of a sudden have this urge to really protect the future that they're going to see. And so the task is to figure out whether you have a set of shared values that is articulated in the same way or in a different way that you can tap into and share your story as well. So the story that I told you at the start of this session is my way of articulating to you my experience and what brought me to this work and why I care about the things that I do. Your job in a conversation is to try and draw that story out of the person that you're talking to. Share your own, because stories are how we connect with people and how we form bonds of trust. And if you form a bond of trust with someone, you're more likely to be able to be in a position to convince them of something. And you're lucky if you already share a bond of trust. That's a really powerful thing. And if you stomp all over it by saying, I'm right and you're wrong, that's not going to work. But if you listen and you try to form a connection, that's going to get you a long step along the way.
That sounds good. Say, for example, I don't know, Anna's got a question. Annika,
no, please go ahead, Carol. I wait.
No, go please, Annika.
Okay, thank you very much for this interesting information. I'm from the other part, Sweden, the opposite part in some way. I'm just curious about, do you know if this model, if it's in place in some other areas of the world? Do you work internationally in some way? Because I mean, climate questions or climate issues are something that affects all of us. So I'm just curious.
Absolutely. And it's a great question. I know I told you about our DIY program. We work with an organisation in Scotland, actually, to build a conversation program within what they have they're called Scottish Communities for Climate Action. They're a coordinating body for a whole lot of climate action organisations over there. So they're building a climate conversation program exactly the same. And we've got a volunteer board, and one of our board members is French and is a part of an organisation in France who do exactly the same thing. So these are the ones that I know of, and I'm sure that there must be many more around the place. Conversations are a very human thing to have, and our model has been based on social research that is very, has been around since the 80s, based on this model of social proof and, building trust and trusted messengers. It's a very common framework that has been put to many different applications, and I'd be really surprised if there's not more groups around like us.
Thank you.
I'm just speaking generally to the group. Would you be interested in us hosting one, just to have a conversation, have a think tank meeting as a hosted conversation workshop event? Nods, more nods.
Yeah,
Be really good.
Oh, we'd love that.
I've been thinking
That's so good.
how we actually have one.
Yes, I think if we can do one with the think tank first, we may find that we can encourage clubs to actually have their conversations as well. So I think we all want practice on learning how to do this, and because we all read things, but it's different when you can actually have an experienced facilitator facilitating what happens, and you can see the role modeling of what goes on. So I think what I will do is we'll work out it'll probably be this sort of time, because it works quite well across the time zones, but we'll just have an extra event and see how we go with it. So
that's fabulous.
Do you have a limit?
Sorry, Carol. Keep going.
Whoever spoke, go for it.
That was me. Sorry, I was just going to say, Carol, that's a really great idea, because I was sitting here thinking, if we do it in the think tank, we can then perhaps encourage by area or district to have one in their, or by area, sorry, to have one in their workshops, their advocacy workshop, and have that climate conversation facilitated through that, because that day gives them an opportunity to have a really good go at it.
Yeah, and allowing 2 hours would be good, because we can have it, we can get people to sort of have, bring a drink, bring a snack, have your time online over the thing. So for us in Australia, in Western Australia, it'll probably be a coffee, but you later in the day in the eastern states, you'll be on your wine by then. So so we could have a bit of fun with it, and I think it sounds great, Jane. I just like the way of just being nurtured through the process. I think we're all I think it is searching for that.
Yeah, it is something that we notice is, like I said, people often feel alone in their concern for this issue, because we as a community aren't used to talking about having difficult conversations. But like you say, it's really heavy content, and it's difficult to actually sit down and look it in the face. I'm trained in climate science, and even so, when I see this video and you really sit down and think about what's coming down the line for us, it's difficult to think through. For my job, I have to read those horrible IPCC reports when they come out. And the latest mitigation report had a quote from one of the co-authors that said, "There is a narrowing window for securing a livable future on this planet." And when you sit and really, truly think about a statement like that, it's awful. It's awful to think through, and to have a trained facilitator to guide us through the emotions that come up when you experience that, and when you hear something like that, and then think, how does this affect my community, and what can I do about it? When I hear that, I just want to, I don't know what I want to do. Part of me wants to chain myself to the coal-fired power station like those incredible Extinction Rebellion people, but I don't, because I have a job I don't want to lose. But you know, you want to take action that feels commensurate to the scale of the problem. And it's just wonderful and very nourishing to have a trained facilitator to help you understand what those actions are that you can take in your own life that feel comfortable and feel right for you, and then connect you to a community of people already taking action. I just quickly want to respond to something that Bronwyn put in the chat. We have worked closely, well, not worked closely, but I've had lots of conversations with various people from the Victorian Women's Trust. They pioneered this model, not this exact model, ours is an adaptation of that, but the kitchen table conversation model that the Victorian Women's Trust came up with is just, it's been a game changer in so many different communities. It's been used so powerfully in those, you know, election campaigns, but more broadly to encourage and facilitate community participation in democracy in various different settings. And I just can't speak highly enough of it. I think it's such an incredible model. They do such good work.
Now, our mission, we're all about creating a gender equal climate justice future. And so it would be quite good if we could obviously have the workshop, but if we can sort of sew in some examples from that space as well, then so we can have our own traditional one first, but then we can see how we could thread in our mission within it, so as we can roll it out to the clubs and areas, so it fits the bill, you know what I mean? So
I love that idea. We've got I said that there's a few organizations we work with where we develop conversation programs that are fit for their community and their constituencies, and that, I think that's such a fabulous idea. We can definitely think through how to adapt the model for your community. Absolutely.
But to give us time first, we can have the traditional one first, and then we can have the conversation around that. I think would be really good. Okay, well, we'll see if we can get something moving before Christmas. And how much notice do you need to have to organise them?
It can work around you. I'll put you in touch with one of our facilitators. We've got loads of people that can help you out, and I'll send that email as soon as I'm off the call now, so you've got something waiting for Monday, and that won't take long.
Okay, well, did anyone have any other questions for Jane, bearing in mind she's got sick children?
I've always got sick children. It never ends.
So Jane, I just want to say we've had a wonderful conversation with you. It's been absolutely fantastic. You've even managed to move us on a bit further. I think we're really thrilled about that idea of working to have a proper climate for change conversation. It was really funny, actually. I mean, I didn't think about it at the time, but 10 minutes before this meeting started, I had the neighbourhood children playing in our garden, and I said to them, I've got to go in, you know, you'll have to take them. And I said, I'm going to this meeting. And they're not people I've ever talked about what I do with, because they're busy, they've got 3 kids, they've got their business. You know, I've never really thought they'd be that interested in climate change. And when I said what I was doing, the mum turned around to the 2 older children who are in grade 1 and kinder and explained to them why it was so important for Sue to go to this meeting, because it was going to help them to have a good world for when they got older that they'd actually be able to live in. And I was like, wow, you know, I had totally not thought of you know, approaching these people. Where are you at now? You know, what can I help you with? So, you know, we all live and learn a great deal all the time. But also, Jane, the way that you've had a conversation today, you've drawn us in to your life and your experience to start with, and then you've talked about the big issues and then what we can do, and it's absolutely perfect. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.